super honored to have Catherine Coleman Flowers with us. She is an internationally recognized advocate for the human right to water and sanitation and on environmental justice in rural communities. She is author of the book Waste, One Woman's Fight Against America's Dirty Secret, founder of the Center for Rural Enterprise and Environmental Justice, a member of the board of directors for the Climate Reality Project, employed as the Rural Development Manager for the Equal Justice Initiative, and is a senior fellow for the Center for Earth Ethics at Union Theological Seminary. For the past 6 years, she has also partnered with the Duke Human Rights Center at FHI on projects centered around the right to water and sanitation. Before I turn the mic over to Ms. Flowers, I just want to remind everyone there will be a Q&A at the end of the presentation, so please keep yourself muted and put any questions you have in the chat, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. Ms. Flowers, take it away.
Well, first of all, welcome everyone that's here, and thank you for joining us this evening. This is my first time doing a virtual class, so if I make any mistakes, please pardon me. This is not what I'm generally accustomed to. Usually, by this time, I would have been on campus at Duke, and we probably would be in a classroom or in an auditorium for me to make the presentation. But the good thing about doing it this way is that we can reach people that are not just on Duke's campus, but people around the country that may have an interest in environmental justice. For those of you that don't know me, I'm going to talk a little bit about my work, where we're going with it, the focus of the center, and then what potential solutions there are and how you might get involved. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm from Alabama. I'm in Montgomery, Alabama as of now, and because of COVID, we're unable to travel. But I live in Montgomery, Alabama, but I grew up in Lowndes County, Alabama, which is where I do a lot of my work. I got involved in environmental justice work pretty much by happenstance because as you will see if you read my book, I started off because my parents were activists in the civil rights movement. I was surrounded by people that were activists in the civil rights movement. And I was like every other child who said, I'll never do what they do, and ended up doing it anyway. So my story evolves as me getting and trying to change my school system, because at that particular time, our school system was still very much impacted by structural racism, and there was a big fight throughout the South, including in Alabama, over equal access to education for African Americans, and a lot of people were still kind of still upset with the Brown case, and they were putting every type of impediment in the way to keep children from going to school together that were not the same race. And they also, in addition to that, those schools like my school that were segregated was deprived of resources. And my first fight was to try to change that. And I was a teenager at the time. And that work evolved through the years, and I became a teacher. And I see that, I realized that a lot of the work that I was doing at that time as a teacher continued. You know, in terms of activism, I was able to combine both the activism and teaching. And I still feel that it is important for those of us that are activists to always work with young people and try to transfer the knowledge. I think that if we're going to be truly transformational, we can't take it with us. So I'm hoping that through the process, the work that I do, that I can also encourage, inspire, and help along the way thousands of young people that can take my place. Because I think in order for us to bring about the change that needs to happen, that's the way we have to look at it. We can't try to take it all with us. So eventually I went back to Lowndes County and started working in 2000, doing economic development, and found that there was a problem with infrastructure, that people were being arrested because they could not own, they couldn't afford to purchase on-site sanitation. I didn't realize how big the problem was, because the narrative at that time that was told to us by state officials was that people just simply couldn't afford it. What they didn't tell us was that there were other factors that were involved. There were ecological factors that people had no control of. And we can't have a template for treating wastewater because it doesn't work everywhere the same way. you have to look at various elements to figure it out. And also, we've been treating wastewater the same way for so many years, and we're not taking into account climate change. So I learned all this over the course of years of trial and error, working with my organization. Initially, the Center for the Alabama Center for Rural Enterprise, and now the Center for Rural Enterprise and Environmental Justice, trying to find ways in which we can address these issues, and how we can and finding ways in which we can elevate it and help people to understand that it impacts all of us. When I first got involved doing this work, I was told often, oh, nobody would, no, the media is not interested in this, it's not sexy, it's in rural communities, far from the major media markets, all those kinds of things that I heard. But one of the lessons that I learned in all of this is that we have to be persistent. If you're persistent, then somebody's going to pay attention and you'll get more help. And that's among the many things that have happened along the way. One of our first collaborators was the National School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor's College of Medicine, when I reached out to Dr. Peter Hotez and told him about what I suspected in terms of illnesses that people were having as a result of being exposed to raw sewage on the ground. I did not even know about hookworm at that time, but that was the first thing that he mentioned to me. But we not only found hookworm, we found other tropical parasites. And we understand the importance of getting the community involved. I mean, what was important about that study that we did was there were people in the community who didn't have PhDs. Some of them didn't have degrees at all. Some of them may not even have had a high school diploma, but they had a wealth of knowledge about the community that we lived in. And they taught me what the problems were. And based on that, I realized that the narrative that I had been fed was not correct. And we were able to use that information in order to find more details about how do we arrive at solutions and what those solutions might look like. And then one of the partners that I have to mention is the partners at Duke University. I mean, if it were not for the partners at Duke, a lot of the work that we've done to expand our capacity would not have happened. I mean, the students have been a vital, vital part of that role in the 5 years that I've been there, the students and the professors, because one of the things that we've actually done was took part of the theory that we had created about how you need to spend time in the communities. And generally in the academic community, people are getting sources from the library or offline, they write papers and get credit for that. But what the students did that were working with us is they actually spent time in the community. And one of the things, if you want to do environmental justice work, you got to go to the community. You're not going to get it just by reading it online or reading other people's work. There are numerous examples throughout the world, throughout the communities that you're in right now, right there in North Carolina, if you are in North Carolina. But I'm sure that every state in the union, you can look around and see an example of environmental injustice. And you can also figure out what your role could be in terms of resolving that. So the students were able to come to the community. And one of the things that I taught them, one of the things that I think is very important about going to rural communities is there's what I call a rural lexicon. In other words, you have to understand rural language. You know, when people write policy about water and wastewater, they write it where when they put in towns, they're automatically excluding a lot of rural communities. When they put in towns or incorporated areas, they exclude a lot of unincorporated areas. And the question is, should areas that are unincorporated not have access to water and wastewater? Should they be denied that access, although they're paying property taxes and all other kind of taxes, should they be denied that access? And that takes I think we have to change the way we think. We feel like we just create a paradigm and everybody fits it, but that's not the way of the world. It's not even true of human nature because everybody is different. It's the same thing when we look at these communities, whether they're rural communities or urban communities, but oftentimes rural communities are left out. And they certainly have been left out of the water and wastewater paradigm in a lot of cases. I've also had the opportunity, since I've been doing this work, to partner and go to other communities that are having water and wastewater problems. Those communities are not just in the South. I think most people, when we talk about this, in their minds, they want to picture it and say, oh, it's just in the South and it's just in Black communities. But I've seen it when I went to Appalachia and I went to West Virginia and talked to families there. they're having issues too. They've had issues for a very long time with the lack of infrastructure or the adequate infrastructure that can either give them access to clean water or to give them access to wastewater treatment. If I've gone to California, which is considered one of the more progressive states in the union, but if you go to the Central Valley, you will find the same problems there. You find environmental justice issues there in terms of access to water and sanitation. If you go to Alaska, you will see there that people are having problems because of climate change and melting permafrost. But they're also having problems because they never got, especially in native lands, they've never got access to water and wastewater infrastructure. If you go to Navajo Nation, I mean, which is Navajo Nation, like Lowndes County, Alabama, has some of the highest COVID, not only infection rates, but death rates in the nation. Lowndes County had among the highest COVID infection and death rates in the state of Alabama. Has a population of less than 12,000, according to the census. But if people don't have access to water and sanitation, that's going to continue to be a problem. And what COVID ended up doing was exposing those disparities in such a way in which we have no choice but to do something about it. We cannot continue to look away, because when I first started doing this work, what I started thinking about, wow, we're always talking about diseases starting somewhere else and then coming to the United States. We have the conditions here where diseases can fester and start here too and spread and go throughout the world. When I went back and I read about the Spanish flu of 1918, actually, there are some that theorize that it didn't start in Spain. It actually started in Kansas, here in the United States, and was spread by troops. That was the last major pandemic that we had. So we have to do something to diminish or eliminate the inequalities that exist in terms of basic sanitation, access to environmental justice, and my issue is primarily water and sanitation. But water and sanitation are not the only environmental justice issues. There are issues. When I went with some students from Duke and Dr. Albright, we went down to Cancer Alley. And there we saw where people were being exposed to toxins that are being admitted into the air. And a lot of people tend to think, oh, these are, when we hear the politicians talk about the rhetoric, especially Southern politicians, they want to talk about, people coming across the border and what they're bringing with them. But what I saw was a whole lot of international corporations that are based in other countries that they were allowing to be in Cancer Alley and pollute an area where people of color were living that were poor. And the people were dying from cancer, and there was nothing being done about it. And I guess the paradigm shifts. If you're poor and you're coming across the border, you end up in a cage. But if you have money, you can come across the border and bring toxins and poison our air and water, and it's okay. That paradigm needs to change because it's not fair. And I think as we look at environmental justice overall, it's about justice, it's about fairness, it's about equity. And I think we have to also understand that it intersects with climate justice as well, because a lot of these issues that we're seeing are being either exacerbated by climate change, or these are issues that are creating climate change. Because what we saw at Cancer Alley was actually creating climate change, but it was also creating environmental justice issues that people are suffering from right now. When I heard about Hurricane Laura coming off the Gulf of Mexico, one of the things that I thought about was, oh wow, first of all, I thought about New Orleans, which is already below sea level. A lot of that area along the Louisiana coast is below sea level. When we went to Cancer Alley, we actually had to look up to see the ships, going on the Mississippi River. That means that the land is below where the river was, and clearly there would be flooding. Excuse me. So what I thought about when I saw this, when I saw the weather report and saw that a hurricane was coming ashore, I just remember going across 10, going to Houston, and seeing on the way going through Louisiana, you can go through this area and all you see is lit up at night in Lake Charles, Louisiana, because all you see are these petrochemical plants that are located there. And I thought, wow, what is going to happen to the people that live in that community if that hurricane comes ashore? And lo and behold, it's happened, but we don't see it in the news. Those people are still suffering. They don't have power. They can't go to their homes. They're lined up to get food. A lot of them they have nowhere to turn. And this is at a time we're dealing with a pandemic as well. So if we don't address these environmental justice issues, they're going to get worse. They're going to get worse, and they keep getting magnified over and over again. And we look at what's happening in California right now. I mean, there are fires everywhere. And because of the fires that are taking place, the air quality is being diminished, and a lot of people are suffering. And I talked to a friend of mine who lives in Fresno, and she said, Catherine, pray for the farm workers, the ones that are feeding us, because they're out there in those fields and they're suffering. And a lot of them are not getting the care that they need. They're suffering from COVID, and they're also in a position where they're having to contend with the smoke and the air quality because they have to work, because they're considered essential workers. And even at a time like that, unless the fire just moves them out of there, they're still out there working. And I was like, wow, we have no idea how we have created an economic paradigm that supports suffering for the poor, but we're benefiting from it, and we have to change that. And I think one of the good things about this type of class and being able to be engaged with young people is that I think that you're not at the point where you are making the kinds of decisions that say it's okay for people to die. I never thought I'd live in a country that would say it was okay for senior citizens to pass away because of COVID, or it was okay for your grandmother or grandfather to die for the economy. I mean, where have we gone as a nation if we've gotten to that point where we're so morally bankrupt that we don't care about life and death and who dies, as long as it's not the people that are making those kind of pronunciations. So it is very, I think that the work of those of you that are interested in environmental justice is even more important now than it's ever been before. It's more important now than it's ever been before. What can we do about it? Well, first of all, I think to have the type of collaborations that we've modeled through the Franklin Humanities Institute, working with young people who are actually going into some of these communities and helping people to find solutions. Even when we talk about doing research, when we put together our most recent study, the questions were, the pilot questions were made at Duke, but before we went out into the community, they had to sit down with people that were going to go out and do those surveys that knew the community to say, no, these questions are not appropriate. People are not going to respond to them. They're too long. They're asking for too much information, or you need to word the question this way. And I think that that's very important, especially when you go in environmental justice communities. I think we also have to ask communities when we go there, what do you need? Don't go in knowing everything. I think that's a turnoff, because they've been living in the community all the time. And sometimes they know what the solutions are too, as well as knowing what the problems are. They just don't have the access to be able to articulate it. But what you can do is use your access and your influence to lift up their voices so that somebody can hear, and maybe those policies can change so that they will always get these dirty industries, whether we're talking about Eastern Carolina, where you have the hog farms, the factory farmings, the CAFOs that are creating industrial problems, that are creating environmental justice issues there, or whether you're talking about coal ash, which is a problem throughout the South, where coal ash, actually, I think they're removing it from North Carolina, but there was some discussion at one point about bringing it to Alabama. There are all these kinds of issues that are there, but I think going into the communities first and being there to be a servant leader, not to go in there and lead them, because they have enough leaders in the community already. They need people to go in there, and you can take your expertise to serve that community and to bring about the change that needs to happen. I think the other thing that's important as young people, and I've seen this happen, because of my experience at Duke, is that a lot of the young people that we're working with now are in the work world. And they're taking those same values that they've always had into the work world with them. And some of them have opened doors, and they've changed minds of people in some of these areas where folk have never had the chance to go to a Lowndes County. And I'm in constant contact with my former students who are now doing outstanding things themselves. Actually, I just did a shout out to one of my students. And a lot of you know Bryce Crackman. So when I first went to Duke 5 years ago, and I spoke at the Nicholas School. The first person to show up was Bryce. Bryce was a freshman at that time. Bryce is now working for Participant Media, and over on more than one occasion we've intersected. One, Participant Media was working with Just Mercy, which is the Just Mercy, which is the book that was written by Brian Stevenson, who I worked for, and it went on to become a movie, a feature film. He was engaged in working on that, and recently was also engaged with the uh, the documentary about Representative John Lewis, Good Trouble. So I'm seeing these intersections, and the people from Participant told me when I met them, when they came to Montgomery, I had lunch with them and Bryce, and they said Bryce told us about the work that he did as a student at Duke with you in Lowndes County. And the person who hired him said that's one of the reasons why we hired him. So there's a way to have these authentic experiences and be able to take what you've learned and apply it beyond Duke. And a lot of people are very, very interested in seeing individuals that selflessly give of themselves, but at at the same time have this deep value system from wanting to help in community. And I am very proud of Bryce and the work that he's done, because he's used his access to also continue to facilitate and help the project that we're working on now. For those of you that want to do work in the community, find organizations right there in North Carolina. There's the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network that's doing outstanding work. And they have been doing it for a very long time. And if you could find a way to be a part of that. I know that virtually right now it's hard to be as engaged as we would be, but this is just a moment. You know, I strongly feel that there are enough bright minds in the world that is going to find a vaccine for COVID. It may not happen November the 3rd. I think the best vaccine for November the 3rd is voting. But other than that, I think that after that, there probably will be at some point a vaccine where we'll be able to get close to normal again. It probably never will be the way it once was, but at least be able to engage with each other. And then when you can engage and go out in those communities, identify those organizations that are around you that you can go and work with and learn from, because I think it'll help you whether you're in the corporate world or whether you choose to work on the grassroots level or whether you choose to go and work on policy areas. We've organized the Center for Rural Enterprise and Environmental Justice, and what we're doing with the center is we're focusing on three things. One of the three things we're focusing on is training and education. One of the things that we learned about working with students at Duke is that we have to be able to work in those communities where people are impacted by these issues, these environmental justice issues. And learning how to do that, I think, is very important. And one of the things we want to do is to teach other universities, as well as to teach people that work with various organizations. A lot of the big green organizations, they mean well, but they've never worked in these communities. And we want to teach them how to engage, how to go in, how to go in and be able to be a learner, as opposed to go in thinking they know everything and turning people off, or go in and writing a paper and getting millions of dollars for somebody else's work. People are tired of that. So that's one of the things that we want to be able to help and engage around. The second thing that we want to work on is policy. A lot of the policies need to change. I mean, the policies were written at a time when we probably first built some of the first sewer systems in the United States. That needs to change. And a lot of people, when they think about sewer, they think about big pipe sewer. And they don't realize that in rural communities, that may or may not work. Or we may need to come up with some other ways of addressing that. But certainly the policy needs to change. And we've been engaged in that. Students did research on the policies that were already in place, policies in Alabama. And students, when I went and testified before Congress, there was a student who went with me, actually right behind me, was a student who's there, who's currently Brandon Hunter, who is a PhD candidate there right now in the School of Engineering. And Brandon was there with me when we engaged and brought together policymakers in Washington, D.C., Duke was a co-sponsor of that. And we had representatives from various congressional offices that came in to learn. And the students were a part of it. And the presentation were made by students who had actually spent time and worked in Lowndes County. And that is very important, to have that type of experience and be able to engage in real life activities that can change the lives of people that are being impacted. And then, of course, the third area that we're focusing on is technology. We have to change the technology. We have to change the tech. One of the things that we've learned now is that COVID is emitted through sewage. There are some places that are actually testing sewage to find out the level of contagion of COVID in their communities. They're doing that around the world, and they're starting to do that in some places here in the US. I saw an article last week where the University of Arizona, that's how it's containing its COVID infection rates by testing its wastewater. And they can see then whether or not they need to isolate, quarantine, or start testing the areas before it starts showing up and infecting a lot of people. And we have to create a toilet that's going to kill viruses, because they're finding out that one way in which COVID could spread is through aerosols. When you flush the toilet, you don't see what comes out, but it does come out. And if there's a virus there, people could ultimately get it. So those are the kinds of things that we're going to have to focus on. But I think the shift in the paradigm is that we like to bring people to the table who are actually suffering from these things right now to help be a part of the solution. Because I think that oftentimes we get what we used to call in the country the big head. When we get a degree, we think that we know it all, and we go into the community and start telling them, I've seen this happen. We start telling them, this is what you need. And I've just had a recent experience where people came in, and when they first called me, I told them what the problem was. But they had some other people that had more influence than me was telling them something different. But I was getting my information from the people that actually lived in the community. And when they went in, they found out that the people were wrong, the information they were getting, but they had to have that experience. And then they came back to me and said that you're right. And I'm going to work with them on finding some real solutions, because now they know firsthand that the way they were going was the wrong way to do it. So we got to change that paradigm and make sure that when Miss Charlie May, who a lot of students have met that work with me in Lowndes County, when Miss Charlie May is talking, Miss Charlie May is the expert, because Miss Charlie May is the one that's living with the raw sewage coming into her house on a regular basis. And that is true of any environmental justice community. So I am just thrilled to be here to share with you. And I'm not good at talking for a very long time. I really like to take questions, and I like more of a conversational approach. And one of the things that I learned when I was teaching, especially teaching junior high school students prepare you for teaching college students. Because if you can entertain a junior high school student, you can entertain, because their attention span is not that long. But I know when you start getting up to 40, 45 minutes of talking, people's eyes start glazing over, especially in the evening. So I would like I know a lot of you probably have questions about the work that I do, questions about how you can be engaged, questions about any question related to environmental justice I can answer. And if I can't answer it, then of course I can refer you to some people that can. And then the other thing I like to do in addition to that is ask you to follow me on Instagram. Catherine C. Flowers is where I am on Instagram, and you can follow me on Twitter. And I also have a Facebook page, but I'm almost at my limit for Facebook, but Instagram, and also you can follow me on Twitter. One thing that I haven't mentioned is that I had the opportunity to serve on the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force. That was really a blessing for me to get that call. I had actually Senator Bernie Sanders had initially invited me to Washington to be part of a town hall meeting. And I went there and had a good experience. And I invited him at that time to come to Lowndes County, Alabama, which he did. And when he came to Lowndes County, he had the opportunity to go and visit and see firsthand the kinds of things that most politicians making policy never get a chance to see. And he told me that he was going to send help, and the help came in the form of the call that I received to serve on this committee. And this task force included, it was chaired by AOC and also Secretary John Kerry, and it included some people that were very, very interested in environmental justice. And I was just so happy to serve with the people that were on that task force, because we made environmental justice front and center of climate change and climate justice. And we cannot talk about climate change and climate justice without talking about environmental justice. And I was also happy to hear that during my first time ever in all my years of life, seeing in a major political convention, I heard environmental justice mentioned several times. And generally that does not happen. So I'm glad that you have this class. I'm glad to see Duke taken seriously, other than the work that they were doing with us, but expanding the work that it's doing around environmental justice, because it's going to be so important to the future, and you're going to be part of the solution. And I'm looking forward to helping you in any way I can. So now I'll open it up for questions.
Yeah, so I can read out some of the questions that are in the chat. The first one is from me. Something that I was really curious about was, how have you seen Lowndes County or other communities like it change in the years that you've been doing this amazing work?
I think the way I've seen it change is initially people were afraid to even talk about the issue. And now they're speaking out about it. I think the reason it's been hidden for so long is because they were afraid of retaliation. And it is also, we're also hearing from other communities around the country. Before, everybody thought it was just a Lowndes County. There's 67 counties in Alabama, and everybody was just focusing on Lowndes County, like Lowndes County was the only one that had this problem. Well, it's in all 67 counties in the state of Alabama, that there are people that are having wastewater problems, whether it is them not having access to sewage or at all, or they have on-site systems that don't work, or they have these small town systems that are not working either. So the way it has changed for us is that we now have more information than we ever had that will lead us to finding the right type of solutions instead of finding short-term solutions. And then the next generation got to come along and try to solve the same problem. I think that is one of the changes that I've seen. I've also seen that there is more legislation that's happening on the federal level to get funds to rural communities than ever before as it relates to this particular issue. That people are talking about wastewater infrastructure and making sure that everyone has access to it. Those are the kinds of changes that I'm seeing on the policy level. Resources is now being directed toward not just those areas that have failing systems or no systems, but there are also resources being directed toward trying to find systems that actually work and finding ways in which to address it, taking into account climate change.
You might have addressed this, but another question in the chat is talking about policy proposals and solutions. So has most of that just been funding related? Or have there been like codes changed around infrastructure?
I think it should be funding related, because changing the codes by itself doesn't do anything but criminalize people. We got to get away from coming up with systems to criminalize folk. That's going to push more people into the closet to not talk about it. Because just to give you an example, we just had there's a family that we've been working with in Lowndes County for a very long time. And actually she was one of the surveyors that worked with us through the study we did with Duke. She passed away from COVID. And a family, one of the families that came to visit gave a donation to our nonprofit that we used to buy her home, but she was never able to live in a home. We couldn't even bring it to the site because when you dug down 25 inches, you struck water. So that meant a certain type of system had to go in place, go there. And we were told that it would cost $28,000. And that doesn't include the engineering that we had already paid for to get to that point to find out what was needed. And she had a half acre of property, and over a third of that, about 2/3 of that was going to be used for the wastewater treatment system. And so very little of it could be used for the home. So we were told that she had to get another half acre just to even put in place a septic system for one home, which was a mobile home. So if the codes were changed, and the codes are already in place that would criminalize her. Now we just moved the home there, even right now that she's passed on. And we just put the home there and told her family they can move into it. They'll be subject to criminal violations. And so it's more than a code change that has to take place, because I think a lot of the codes do not take into account the natural ecology. It doesn't take into account climate change, and we have to come up with another way to address this. And then on the other hand, if you're talking about poor families, changing the codes and not giving them the resources to deal with it is not going to change anything either. So we have to make sure that there's funding in place where they can get access to this. It's even when you look at climate change and we talk about solar. You know, ideally, we would hope that everybody have access to solar. But if you're living in a house like this one family lived in, where she had to put traps in it to keep the opossums from coming into the house, I mean, how is that going to help her power bill? Yes, she'll have solar on top of the house and the bill would be a little cheaper, but she'll still be in an inadequate home. And we have to look at it. We got to change these systems, and this is what I call these are the systematic structures that create poverty and keep people trapped. And we're going to have to really dig down deep as we have discussions about racism and social justice in this country right now. We got to dig down deep and see, who are these codes really written for? And who do they generally penalize? And does it lead to a solution? No, it doesn't. So we have to come up with a way in order to make sure that we have proper infrastructure and that people have access to it, especially people that cannot afford it.
One other question we have in the chat here is, to what extent are rural and or low-income communities in the Gulf being supported by the Restore Act and other Deepwater Horizon settlement money, particularly to support wastewater infrastructure and management that fits particular needs of the communities?
I can't answer that question. I don't know. I don't know what's happening along the Gulf itself, but I do know, and I've heard from families there that are having problems. So obviously it's not helping everybody. And I've heard from communities, and I've been to communities that are having problems. So especially in Louisiana. So, but Louisiana is not the only place. They have problems in Mississippi. There's a study that has not been published yet where you're going to see that there are parasites. They're also finding intestinal parasites in several southern states, including states in the Gulf South and South Carolina.
The next question is from Mackenzie Francis Johnson, asking, how or what do you think about the issue of infrastructure violence in rural communities? Like climate change, it seems to be a question of too much dapple or too little wash. How do we address this dichotomy in environmental justice work?
Wait, ask that question again.
Sure. So what do you think about the issue of infrastructure violence in rural communities? Like climate change, it seems to be a question of too much Dakota Access Pipeline or too little WASH. I can't remember what that stands for. And the question is, how do we address this dichotomy in environmental justice work?
Well, I think that one of the things that we got to do with everything in this country is that we got to go back and peel back the layers of why we put these systems in place initially, and whether or not it was based on justice or whether or not it was based on inequality or just plain old neglect. And I think that once we address those issues, then we'll find some of the answers. Because when I've gone to other places, like when I went to Centerville, Centerville is located in Illinois, and I saw just as much raw sewage on the ground there, and that's about 20 minutes outside of St. Louis. Just as much raw sewage on the ground there than I saw in Lowndes County. And that's supposed to be up north in a more progressive area. But when you find, but one of the things that I found is very common in most EJ communities, these are poor communities, they're marginalized communities, or they're people of color. So we have to change that dichotomy. And there was no accident that these things were put in place to favor people that were more, that had more wealth than it did for those people that did not have that. And until we do that type of real unpacking these kinds of things and changing it, we're going to continue to have what we have right now across the nation. And there's no, I cannot separate what's happening in Lowndes County and other parts of the country to what's happening with Black Lives Matter and criminal justice reform, because they've even criminalized people that can't afford wastewater. But if you went to, but at the same time, the people that were building DAPL, I'm sure they probably got and are getting subsidies to be able to do that, and to go over and mine in places that where they shouldn't mine, but you can't get the funding that you need to put in place adequate wastewater infrastructure. We have to change those paradigms.
The next question is about resource recovery plans in urban areas. The question is there potential for this in rural areas or an alternative?
I'm not sure. I'm not an engineer, but I do believe that one of the things, at least in my mind, what I envision, I think we have to look at. I think we should recover the resources because there's a lot that we put in the ground that we can recover. I think that what I like to see is a toilet that when the water comes out, it's clean. Period. And if we could create that, I think we've done a lot.
The next question is, what is the proposal for making these changes? How do governments pay for providing the services needed?
Well, I think they should pay for it the way they pay people to go and drill for oil and to frack. You know, we can provide supplements. We just gave away a whole lot of money to businesses. We've been doing that for the last 3 years, giving away money to businesses that have still laid people off. You know, that did not, there's been a massive transfer of wealth to people that already had it, but there has not been that same type of in the other direction. So there are ways in which it can be done. I think that we got to change our minds, and we think it's okay to give people that have money, but it's not okay to give people that don't have money or resources. And that's part of the paradigm that we have to change in our minds and the way we govern and what we expect from government.
So the next question is actually a comment saying that someone really appreciates your point that degrees can be dangerous if not wielded mindfully in community-driven work. And that also really stood out to me as well, how important it is to recognize the expertise that is in communities, even if it's not from someone who has a degree.
Yeah, because the degree only means that you were able to pass those tests and read those books and give the information back to the instructor in a lot of cases. It doesn't mean that you've actually been to Lowndes County, Alabama. I mean, for an example, we have people all the time that when they would come and I would tell them, you need to write down the directions because your GPS is not going to work. And they think it's going to work anyway, and then they get lost, you know, and they don't understand that you could, I can give them the address for a place that may say Hayneville, Alabama, but it's not in Hayneville. That's the post office. That's the post office they get their mail from. That's not the city where they live, or that's not the town where they live, you know, or even the incorporated area. It could be 30 miles from Hayneville, but that's where they get their mail. Or the phone number may be, it may have the prefix for Selma, but Selma is in Dallas County and Whitehall is in Lowndes County. And it's those kinds of things that you can't understand unless you live in the community. And we oftentimes just giggle to and chuckle to ourselves, and they look at us like we're crazy until they get lost. And after they get lost, and they come back to us and say, oh, well, if they come back to us at all. I remember one group that came, it was a news crew that never made it. I remember when I tried to tell them, they said, they were from Canada, and they said, well, we've gone all over the world. Okay. They never made it. And when they tried to call me, the phone kept cutting out, and I couldn't tell them what to do, nor did they have GPS. So they were just lost, and they never made it to the destination they were trying to get to because they refused to listen. So I think it's important that wherever we go, we have to understand that people that live in that community, they have something to offer us. And I think the brightest intellectuals are those that recognize that and can go and partner and come up with solutions that they never would have been able to arrive at had they not worked with people in the local community.
The next question is, how can healthcare professionals play a role in environmental justice?
That's a good question. Wow, I can give you an example, and there may be others. When I read Dr. Peter Hotez's op-ed in the New York Times about tropical diseases being here, and I had often suspected that because I could see the changes as it relates to climate change, it was getting warmer here in Alabama over a course of time, because I could see how the plants were changing and how some of the animals were migrating here that generally live in arid areas. And when I wrote him after seeing this op-ed, and we partnered, and that's how we ended up doing the parasite study. I think without partnering with him and the National School of Tropical Medicine, I probably wouldn't be here talking to you today. I think that made it very important. It also made our work important on the international level too, in a way in which it probably never would have been had we not partnered with people on the academic level that were dealing with healthcare, because we have to understand that the impact that it's having on people's health, especially in the environmental justice community. We have to also understand the impact that climate change is also having on people's health. And if you add climate change and environmental justice together, we got COVID. And I really mean that, because if you look at the communities that are suffering the most, you see where these come together, and then you have this healthcare issue that's pretty glaring, that has exposed a lot of exposed how frail our healthcare system is, not just for the people living in the EJ communities, but for all of us.
The next question is, how do we enact change when political systems are dominated by privilege and white supremacy? Thinking specifically of problematic zoning laws that enabled industry to move so close to residencies in Cancer Alley.
We have to keep fighting. You know, we have to keep fighting. I've lived long enough to have seen white supremacy rear its head several times, because I was born in the 50s and I lived through the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, and now here I am in 2020, and we just have to keep fighting. I think one of the things about this moment in time that I'm seeing young people of all races out there fighting together to try to bring about these changes, whether it's Cancer Alley or whether it's in Louisville or whether it's Kenosha, you know, Milwaukee, wherever. I think it's going to take that. And I guess one of the examples that I saw firsthand was when I went to Standing Rock. And when I went to Standing Rock, there were people that were putting their bodies on the line because the militarized police, that was the first time I saw that, where police officers looked like you couldn't tell them from people in the military, and they were using weaponry against civilians that were peacefully protesting that I had never seen in the US before, and I'm a vet. So I think that we have to continue to fight. We have to continue to vote. I think peaceful protest is the way to bring about change, along with voting, putting people in place that can change those policies, and holding accountable those people that are in office. Because oftentimes when people are elected to these offices, we don't hold them accountable. We feel like if they're part of our church, they're part of our community, they're part of our race, they're part of whatever we have in common with them, we don't check to see who's giving them money and who they're really dancing to, instead of the constituents that they're supposed to represent. So I think that it's very, very important that we have to become a little bit more engaged, and I think that people are a lot more aware now than they've ever been before, and vote. And make sure that when you vote your interests. And some of us are going to have to run for office, not me, but some of us are going to have to, some of you are going to have to run for office to make sure that the integrity is still there once the oath is taken, and all that, the bribery and the money and the things that people try to waive to those people that have the influence, to try to waive these officials to come in and support them instead of support the constituents. So the way in which we fight white supremacy is to make sure we vote these white supremacists out of office, And the way to also fight them is the companies that support them. We don't buy anything from them. I think that we live in an economy that clearly understands money, and when they don't have it, then they change. So we have to operate on various fronts to bring about the changes that we need to have. And we need to have honest discussions about what white supremacy is, because a lot of people are part of the problem and cooperating with it and don't realize that. And that's something that we have to do too. And on that note, I'll give a shout out to the Equal Justice Initiative. If you're interested in learning a lot more about the history of this country and about how we need to talk about truth and reconciliation, I think you should visit the website for the Equal Justice Initiative, www.eji.org. There's a student at Duke, actually two students from Duke, that are doing great work working with EJI around this whole issue. And I think that going to EJI's website, reaching out to Trey and Gabrielle, who are Dukies, I think that can help a lot for those that don't understand how white supremacy plays out and why we are where we are at this particular moment, and then what the potential solutions could be.
We are coming up on the hour, but we have one last question. In your activism surrounding environmental justice policies, do you often have to reach across the aisle and attempt to change people's perspectives on environmental justice issues? Do you find that important change comes from legislators fighting for new policy, or from citizens gaining new perspectives and awareness?
I think it's both. I think you got to understand that these legislators are also citizens. So yeah, I live in a red state. I live in a deep red state. So, so as a result of living in a red state, I've had to learn how to talk with people on both sides. And sometimes we don't always see eye to eye on everything. And one of the things that I learned in my work is that there are no permanent friends, no permanent enemies. There may be permanent interests. And I approach it from that point of view. And I also try to talk to people in such a way to leave room for reconciliation. Because we may not start out together, but we may understand that if it affects your children and your grandchildren too, it gives the person a chance to change. And I think we should always leave a little bit of room for people to change their minds, because I used to be around Reverend Dr. Joseph Lowry, who was one of the presidents of SCLC. And one of the things that he used to say all the time, that there is nothing as powerful as a made up mind change. And in this day and time, I think that we have to all keep that in the back of our heads as we go out there and we deal with people that may have a different opinion. But I think if we find the things that we have in common first, and then we can start talking about the things that are different and the things that we need to work together on.
So one last question that I had was that if there was one thing that all of us could do tonight after this talk, or one message we could take away, what would that be? Or what would that one action be?
Register to vote and vote, and take 10 people with you. I think that's the most important action we can take right now.
All right, I'm just taking another look at the chat and I don't see anything else there. Before we go though, I would love to talk about the book that you have coming out in the beginning of 2021. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Actually, the book is coming out November 17th.
Oh, awesome.
The book is coming out November 17th. It's actually a memoir, and it talks about my evolution as a child activist to an environmental justice activist, and how it intersects with civil rights and climate change. I've gotten a lot of support for the book. I've gotten people to write blurbs for the book that I never would thought write blurbs for the book, like Naomi Klein, who I respect a lot, Jane Fonda, former Vice President Al Gore, former Secretary of State John Kerry, the former EPA Director Gina McCarthy, Rashini Prakash of the Sunrise Movement. There's just been a lot of people that have reached out and given me their support, and I think that it's a book whose time has come. Actually, when I was writing the book, I never thought that I didn't know about the things that were going to happen in 2021. I actually finished writing the book uh, the end of last year, and I think we started editing the first of this year. And we just did not know that some of what I talked about would coincide with the events that are occurring right now. And I feel that it is a way for me to be able to pass on my knowledge to younger people, to see, the road that I took to get there, but also know that it doesn't matter which road you start on. If you decide you want to become an activist, you decide that you want to get involved, get involved. You can do that. And I like to see it as an inspiration to be able to encourage young people, not just the young people that I'm around now, but hopefully generations to come, to be able to get involved and to make the change that's necessary. And the book is available. You can actually order it. You can pre-order it now through Amazon.com or Barnes and Noble. And there's an independent, I don't know that website, there's an independent bookstore that you can also order it through. If you go to the website for the New Press, which is my publisher, you'll see the options there on how you can order the book. And I'm looking forward, hopefully, to coming back to Duke and talking to students about it. I know that there's a book club that's being organized. And if anyone that's listening that's a student that's in the Duke community that want to be a part of this book club, you can actually purchase the book or get in touch with the Franklin Humanities Institute, and they can give you instructions about that. But if you'd like to purchase the book and then later, I'd like to come back and be able to discuss it. Yeah.
There's just a question in the chat about the name of the book.
Yeah, it's I have to look it up for myself because it changed, but it's the title of the book is Waste, and it's about one woman's fight to expose America's dirty secret. So, yeah, because I wanted it to be entitled America's Dirty Secret, period. But that's one of the things I learned about working with a publisher. Sometimes they know best, I'll just pull it back. It's like going into their EJ community. Since that's not what I knew anything about, I let them do what they do. Yeah. But the title of the book is Waste.
Yes, so to everyone who is here tonight, we will be sending out a follow-up email with all of Ms. Flowers' social media information and all the information about the book and links to purchasing that. There was just a parting note that was posted that I want to read. It says, to Ms. Flowers' important point about learning by going to these communities and working with the people fighting on the front lines in their communities. We will be hearing from Naima Muhammad, organizing co-director of the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network, speaking with us on September 29th. So you will also be getting information about that. But thank you so much for being here tonight, Ms. Flowers. I personally found it super impactful. I'm really looking forward to reading your book.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation. And I'm looking forward to being on the campus again.
Yes, me too.
Take care now.
Bye. Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye-bye.